If you've been using your camera with modestly wide aperture like this 50mm f1.8 lens and you're not completely happy with your bokeh,
I hate.
it could be a setting on your camera, front curtain shutter. So if manufacturers know that this can be a detriment to your bokeh, why do they enable this feature? To answer that question, we can go over how the shutter works briefly. If you take a look at your camera, and for instance, I will do a long exposure. This is what a shutter does with a 2-second exposure. There's a first curtain and then the second curtain. You see that? One more time. First curtain, second curtain. And if you notice, that thing is blazing fast. It just goes blazing fast. And the problem with that is that the speed is so fast that it actually shakes your camera. If you press it, you can feel that there's a small vibration. And that can cause some camera shake, which translates to slightly blurry photos. So what manufacturers do these days is have an electronic first curtain shutter, and how that works is via a setting. So I am going to turn that on right now, and pay attention to my finger. I'm going to press the shutter button, okay? It's on a 2-second shutter, so it's going to expose for 2 seconds. But catch this, nothing happened, and then there's only the second shutter. So the first one was purely electronic, second one was the mechanical shutter. So there's only one shutter going this time around. So that means that you won't get the camera shake from the shutter mechanism itself, because the first curtain is electronic, it's on the sensor, and then the second curtain is just closing up and finishing the frame. So all is good, right? Well, not really. We're still talking about chopped bokeh. And you see the busy bokeh effect, and this is a setting you have to change. Turn electronic first curtain shutter off, but only in some scenarios. And I'm going to explain to you first on why this happens. I'm going to show you how that shutter works, and this is going to be pretend shutter blades, these $1 bills. Previously I showed there was a first curtain. This would be your image sensor right here, this manila folder. So the first curtain goes, and then 2 seconds elapses, and then it closes, right? Very simple. Let's say you go faster, 1/10 of a second, you're across and then across again. That would be 1/10 of a second. Okay, fine, these shutter blades are fast. But what happens if you go to 1/8000th of a second? Well, guess what? This shutter blade cannot clear this sensor in 1/8000th of a second. There's a flash sync speed, and that is the speed of how fast the shutter blades can clear the sensor, and that's usually around 2/50th of a second. What happens is that the shutter blades is going to cheat the system a little bit. It starts moving, and it determines that this little portion right here plus the movement is 0.008 of a second, and so it starts to close at the same time. Okay, so that's all normal. That's how conventional shutter works. But when you turn electronic first curtain shutter on, we are working on a 3D plane. Okay, this is a conventional shutter. Everything is parallel. But if you are working on 3D plane, the sensor is actually lower than the shutter blades. So if the shutter blades are flat like this and it's on the same plane, you let the same amount in. You see what I mean? That spacing would be the same all the way through, and the spacing is going to be the same too. But when you raise one of the planes, because the shutter blades cannot touch the sensor, you know, it'll just crash and burn. So if you're far apart, it's no problem. But if your speed is really fast, okay, you're exposing really fast and you are kind of close to each other, right? If I raise this one, guess what happens? I am casting a shadow on this bottom one. There is a shadow cast. So that is how you get the chopped bokeh effect, because of this one is raised and the bokeh blur is like a cone radius. And so this one is raised and is casting a shadow. That's why you see the chopped bokeh. I hope my explanation wasn't too bad. And now back to the video. So with larger aperture lenses, you have a wider cone of light and generally more blur. So what happens if you use a slower lens, and what shutter speeds does this occur at? Let's examine this really quick. For this first test, I'm using an 85mm f1.4 lens, and I'm cycling through at 1/3 stop at a time. As you can see, there's not much going on up until you get the shutter speed of 1/2000th of a second, and then you start to see a subtle hint of the change, and it changes progressively worse all the way up to 1/8000th of a second. So what do you guys think? Is that good? Is that bad? Next up, I'm using a 28-75mm f2.8. So what happens if you use a standard f2.8 zoom? Well, I'm using this at 28mm and f2.8, and as you can see, there isn't much going on all the way till the point that you get to 1/4000th of a shutter speed, and then you can kind of see it change, and then it gets progressively worse all the way up to 1/8000th. So you're an A7C owner and you notice your camera only does electronic first curtain shutter. It's not going to be that big of a deal because your max shutter speed is 1/4000th, and 1/4000th is not that big of a deal. It's there, it exists, and there are workarounds. The workaround for every camera is to simply use the full mechanical shutter, turn off EFCS, or use an electronic shutter. The electronic shutter would not have this issue as well. Now, using a full electronic shutter, you can run into banding issues, and it's not recommended all the time. That's why the A9s and the A1s are so appealing, because they have the ultra fast readout rate and you don't run into those problems. So that's one solution, and it's a little bit expensive. Another solution, maybe not the greatest solution, is to stop down your aperture. Because you're shooting wide open, you probably want the max amount of blur. Stopping down is counterintuitive, not the best option, but that will get rid of that chopped bokeh effect. Another approach would be to simply lower your shutter speeds using an ND filter. This can tackle two problems at once. You can get your shutter speed so low that you have flash sync, and is so low that you also avoid first curtain shutter issues. Another option that doesn't exist is maybe an automated system. So if you have a setting where electronic first curtain shutter is on auto, the camera would automatically detect the shutter speeds and enable or disable that feature. Sony, can we get this feature, please? So I hope you enjoyed the video. Smash that like button if you haven't already, and I will see you on the next one. Thank you and take care.